The biggest misconception I would say that most Americans have about foreign aid is that we're spending most of our money on it, when in fact, that's really not true. U.S. foreign assistance represents almost a rounding error of the U.S. national budget, less than 1%. When you think about the fact that the United States is the world's largest economy, and you think about the contributions the U.S. has vis-a-vis other countries to help out, foreign aid ranks the United States really low on the list of donors. You might be surprised to learn that according to international aid groups like Oxfam, the average American taxpayer spends the same amount roughly every Halloween on candies and costumes, or about $100, as we do per person on U.S. foreign aid. It's a very small amount of the U.S. national budget, but it has huge impact for communities around the world and for Americans right here at home. Thanks to American foreign assistance, we are able to save millions of lives, whether that's from humanitarian conflict, natural disasters. It could be life-saving medical assistance, food aid, vaccines, economic development, nurturing jobs, and other things that really promote ultimately the security of communities around the world. Foreign aid, in turn, supports U.S. national security and is a key tool in order to make sure that the best of America is represented all around the world. When the U.S. government, through the U.S. Congress, created the U.S. Agency for International Development, this was a time when the world was devastated by 2 world wars and the breakup of colonial empires. In fact, the majority of the world at that time lived in extreme poverty. Think about the 1950s, think about the 1960s. This is the creation of many of our global institutions like the United Nations and the World Bank. In 1961, this merged in under then-President Kennedy when he created what we now know as the U.S. Agency for International Development.
The presence of the United States in the free world is involved in your work directly. The people who are opposed to aid should realize that this is a very powerful source of strength for us. It permits us to exert influence for the maintenance of freedom.
It was a tool of diplomacy, and at the time, it was also a tool of the Cold War strategy. Our investments help create open trade, open routes, open access, open borders, and open economies. These are all preconditions for American businesses to be able to thrive overseas as well and have the open markets and access the goods that they need to do well. Consider, the U.S. population is actually only 5% of a global marketplace. These are numbers that actually Marco Rubio, when he was in the Senate on the Foreign Relations Committee, used to make the case for U.S. foreign assistance. He would say,
95% of the consumers in the world, 95% of the people on this planet who buy things, live outside the United States. If you can only sell them to 5% of the world's population that happens to live in the United States of America, that's one thing. But imagine how much more you could sell. How much more money you could make, how much more value you would have for your shareholders, how many more employees and jobs you would create if you could sell to more of that 95% of the people around the world.
Having societies, investing in societies abroad is not just the right humanitarian thing and the moral thing to do as Americans. It has been one of those preconditions for having a global economic order that allows American businesses and American consumers to thrive. So what are the consequences if the United States pulls out of its leadership role in foreign assistance and relinquishes that role to either other actors or to nobody because nobody chooses to step up and fill that gap? In the short term, we will see massive job layoffs. Shipments of food that have been shipped from the United States are sitting in grain and other storage warehouses all around the world, rotting instead of feeding the very people they were designed to feed. Vaccines and medicines are sitting in storage units, on ships, in other ports, instead of actually making it to the village level for people to access life-saving care. There are people right now stuck in clinical trials and medical trials who are not receiving their next dose. Fundamentally, one of the things that gets broken so quickly overnight that becomes hard to rebuild is the break of trust between the United States and our partners around the world. Just like in a friendship, it takes years to build trust and just moments to break. Oftentimes, we've had secretaries of state refer to development assistance as part of an integral three-legged stool between defense, diplomacy, and development. And if you remove one of those legs, the entire stool collapses. That's going to have impacts on the economy. That's also going to have impacts on our security and military partnerships and relationships.